I never thought I'd have to explain to grown adults that my driveway belongs to me. Yet there they were, three men standing like they owned the street, dark sunglasses, black polos, and clipboards in hand, glaring at my house like it was a fortress they were about to storm. And let me tell you, the look on their faces screamed one thing: we don't negotiate, we enforce. I paused on my porch, coffee in hand, trying to remind myself that, yes, this was a neighborhood in the United States, not some dystopian movie. But the way they strutted toward my gate, it felt like the opening scene of a nightmare I hadn't signed up for. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Can I help you with something?" The tallest one tilted his head, smirk curling like he knew a secret I didn't. "We're here on behalf of the HOA," he said, as if that title automatically gave him permission to intimidate people. "You've been non-compliant with the community standards." I blinked. Non-compliant? I hadn't even received a notice yet, just the usual vague email about maintaining aesthetic harmony. And now, apparently, I was under siege. I set my coffee down and stepped closer, careful to stay inside my property line. "I'd like to see the notice in writing, and before you say anything, I've already checked the rules. You're overstepping your authority." He laughed, not a friendly laugh, a kind that made my stomach tighten. "Authority isn't really the issue, enforcement is." At that moment, I noticed a few neighbors peeking through their blinds, whispering to each other. I could feel their eyes on me, half curious, half terrified. But the thing is, I couldn't let this escalate. Not yet. I had to keep control, calm but firm. "You're standing on my property," I said, stepping a bit closer. "If you don't leave, you're trespassing." They exchanged a glance like my words were some kind of joke. The tallest one stepped forward, ignoring the verbal boundary I'd just set. "You don't get to tell us what to do." I felt my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay composed. Funny, I thought I did. It's my property, my rules. Then something unexpected happened. One of them reached into his pocket like he was about to make a move that would cross a line I wasn't willing to let them cross. I raised my hand calmly and said, "Listen, I don't want this to get ugly. But I warned you. I know my rights, I know the law, and I will not let anyone intimidate me or my family." For a second it was silent, too silent. You could hear a pin drop on our street. I could see doubt flicker in their eyes. Maybe they weren't expecting a homeowner to stand firm. But that confidence was short-lived. The tallest guy grinned again. "We've ignored warnings before, you'll see how this ends." That's when I realized this wasn't just about some minor HOA complaint. This was personal. They weren't coming to fix a rule violation. They were here to scare me into compliance. I stepped back into my house, keeping the door between us, and grabbed my phone. Not to call 911 yet, but to make sure I had proof. Every word, every step, every threatening glance. Because if this escalated, I wasn't going down quietly. Through the front window, I watched them start to circle my yard like sharks, clipboards in hand, looking for a weakness. My neighbors were still watching, phones out, trying to capture this surreal spectacle. I couldn't blame them. I didn't even recognize my street anymore. And then it hit me, I had underestimated them. The HOA had sent muscle instead of a letter, and I had just realized my warning might not be enough. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and muttered under my breath. "You want a war? Fine, but it's my territory and I don't back down." And that's when the tallest one stopped in front of my gate, smiled in a way that made my blood run cold, and said the words I'll never forget. "We're not here to talk." In that moment, I knew everything was about to explode. I could feel the weight of their stares through the glass. The tallest guy was leaning casually against my gate, clipboard dangling like it was a weapon. The other two were packing, muttering to each other, clearly debating who was going to make the first move. I took a slow breath, trying to steady my nerves. I had given fair warnings before, to neighbors, to petty solicitors. But this felt like staring down a storm that had no interest in leaving. I opened the door just a crack, enough to remind them this was still my territory. "Listen," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I don't know what you think you're doing here, but you're trespassing. I've never received a proper notice. You're crossing a line and you're about to regret it." The tallest one tilted his head, smirk widening. Regret. You're the one who should be worried. We've been sent to make sure compliance is enforced. I clenched my fists, but I forced a small smile. Humor can be a weapon, and I intended to wield it carefully. Enforced, huh? You mean like strong-arming people in their own yards? Because that's exactly what this looks like. He took a step closer. I took one back, careful not to give up any ground, and said, "Let me be very clear. I'm not intimidated by your theatrics. You can leave now or things are going to get messy, and trust me, I'm better prepared for messy than you think." The two other men exchanged a look. Something changed. The energy shifted. They weren't quite sure how to handle me, and that hesitation bought me a precious few seconds. Seconds to think, seconds to strategize, seconds to breathe. "Prepared," the tallest guy sneered. "You don't even know what's coming." "Oh, I know exactly what's coming," I replied, keeping my tone calm, letting each word land deliberately. "And if you think showing up like this is going to scare me, you've underestimated me. Big mistake." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but I forced myself to appear unshakable. Confidence is contagious, sometimes even to your enemies, and I needed them to doubt themselves, if only for a moment. "Look," I continued, stepping fully onto my porch but keeping my hands visible, "I don't want this to get physical. I don't want anyone hurt. But I've seen enough of your enforcement tactics online to know you're not here for a friendly conversation. So I'm giving you one last chance. Leave my property. Now." For a moment, silence. Just the faint hum of the street, the occasional car in the distance, the birds pretending nothing is wrong. Then the tallest one laughed. Not a short chuckle, a deep, mocking laugh, like he had just won a mental game he was playing against me. "You think a few words are going to stop us," he said. "We've ignored warnings before. People like you, they always fold eventually." That's when something in me snapped, not anger exactly, but a cold clarity. I realized these weren't people who could be reasoned with. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to intimidate, to test boundaries, to see if I'd cave under pressure. "Well," I said, my voice dripping calm fury, "then I guess you're about to find out what happens when you pick the wrong person to intimidate." Their smirks faltered slightly. I could see the hesitation in their eyes, that tiny crack in their armor. Maybe they were starting to realize this wasn't going to be an easy score. I stepped back inside, keeping my eyes on them through the glass. Slowly, deliberately, I reached for my phone, but I didn't call the cops, not yet. No, I had a different plan in mind. Documentation first. Proof. Every word, every move, every threat, everything. I could hear them muttering to each other now, frustration creeping in. My warning had worked in a way. They were second-guessing themselves. The arrogance that had carried them up to my gate was cracking. And then the tallest guy straightened, his smirk returning, but this time it was more measured. "You'll see soon enough," he said, voice low and threatening. I felt a shiver run down my spine, not because I was scared, but because I knew the real chaos hadn't even started. Not yet. I took a deep breath, heart hammering, mind racing. Every instinct screamed that things were about to escalate. And I knew that if I didn't stay calm, stay clever, stay ready, this day could turn into something I, and maybe even my street, wouldn't forget. So I squared my shoulders, looked them in the eyes through the glass, and whispered under my breath, "Bring it on, you just made a very big mistake." And just like that, the tension hung in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife. The next move, that was theirs, and I couldn't wait to see it. I didn't know whether to laugh or panic. The three men were now circling my yard like predators, clipboards in hand, acting like they were inspecting the property for, well, I wasn't exactly sure. Maybe it was imaginary violations, maybe it was just intimidation. All I knew was this: they were crossing a line I'd warned them about, and I wasn't going to back down. I stepped closer to the door, holding it like a shield. "Listen," I said, my voice calm but firm, "I've already made myself clear. This is my property. You do not have permission to enter. One more step and that's trespassing." The tallest one predictably smirked. "We have ways to enforce compliance," he said, his words dripping with menace. "Enforce compliance," I repeated under my breath, shaking my head. "Right, because strong-arming a homeowner is totally legal in America." I took a breath, trying to steady my heartbeat. My neighbors were watching now, some from their windows, some peeking from behind their fences. I could feel their eyes on me, weighing every move. I didn't want anyone hurt, but I also couldn't let this go unchecked. One of the other two, shorter, balding, jittery, tried to edge around my side gate. I caught him in the corner of my eye and stepped forward. "You're still on private property," I warned. "This isn't a suggestion." For a moment they froze. I could see the hesitation in their faces, the slight flicker of doubt. Maybe they were starting to realize I wasn't just going to roll over. Maybe they were finally sensing that this wasn't a casual neighborhood disagreement. It was a battle of wills. "Sir," the tallest one said, leaning forward, lowering his voice, "we're only trying to do our jobs. We don't want trouble." I forced a small laugh, bitter but controlled. "Trouble? You're literally trespassing on my property. You're threatening me. If you're calling that doing your job, then congratulations. You've just rewritten the definition." They exchanged a glance, like some silent conversation passed between them. I didn't need to know what they said. The tension was thick enough to choke on. And then it happened. The balding guy tried to step through my gate, just one step. That was all it took for me to react. I put a firm hand on the gate, blocking it. My voice was calm but sharp. "Stop right there. Do not take another step." He blinked, hesitated, then smirked, clearly expecting me to back down. But I didn't. I could see the frustration building. The tallest guy tensed like he wanted to step in, but something held him back. Maybe it was my composure, maybe it was my neighbors watching, maybe it was the fact that I wasn't afraid. I straightened my shoulders and said, louder this time, "I don't know who you think you are, but this is my house, my yard, my rules. And if you try to come any closer, it's going to get very, very unpleasant for you." For a moment, it was dead silent. I could hear a bird chirp somewhere, the distant hum of traffic. It was surreal, standing there, heart hammering, facing three grown men who thought they could intimidate me. And then the tallest one leaned back slightly, his smirk twitching. "You really think standing there yelling is going to stop us?" I tilted my head, smiled faintly, and replied, "It's not yelling, it's a warning. And if you don't leave now, it's going to be a very, very expensive lesson in why you should have listened." The air seemed to shift. Their confidence faltered just slightly. I could see it, the tiniest crack in the armor. For a moment, I allowed myself a flicker of satisfaction. But I knew better than to relax. This wasn't over. They were testing me, probing for weakness, and I wasn't about to give them any. I stepped back inside my house, keeping the door between us. Slowly, deliberately, I reached for my phone, not to call the cops yet, but to document everything. Every move, every step, every threatening glance, because if this escalated further, I needed proof. I needed leverage, and I needed it all recorded. From the window, I watched the three of them now. The tallest one muttered something to the others. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the frustration spreading like wildfire. My warning had worked in part. They were hesitating. They were questioning themselves. And that's when I realized something terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. The chaos hadn't even begun yet. Not really. They'd underestimated me. They thought I'd back down. They thought they could intimidate me. But I wasn't backing down. I wouldn't. And the moment they realized just how wrong they were, that's when things were going to get interesting. I leaned against the doorframe, watching them through the glass, my pulse racing. My neighbors had gathered quietly, phones out, watching the surreal standoff unfold. And I whispered under my breath, almost like a promise to myself, "You're about to learn the hard way. You should have listened. Now, let's see how far you're willing to push it." The tallest one's eyes met mine. A smirk played across his face, but there was a flicker of uncertainty. And in that instant, I knew, whatever happened next, it was going to get messy. And the audience watching, well, they'd be leaning forward, waiting, wondering, what would I do when the HOA thugs crossed the line completely? Just when I thought the standoff couldn't get any more ridiculous, it did. A car pulled up slowly to the curb, lights flashing, and I froze. Not in fear, well, maybe a little, but in disbelief. They'd actually called the cops. The HOA thugs. My neighbor's eyes widened as the patrol car rolled to a stop, and suddenly the quiet street felt like a crime scene. I opened the door a crack, my heart hammering. I could see the officer stepping out, badge gleaming in the afternoon sun. He approached cautiously, glancing first at the three men in black polos, then at me. I raised my hands calmly. Calm, calm. I repeated it in my head like a mantra. "Afternoon, sir," the officer said politely, nodding toward the men. "What's going on here?" The tallest HOA thug, never one to shy away from a chance to act important, straightened and puffed out his chest. "Officer, this man is in violation of several community rules. He's refusing to comply with HOA standards, trespassing. He's non-compliant." I blinked. Non-compliant? That was rich coming from a man currently standing on my property, clipboard in hand, clearly threatening me. I smiled faintly, calm and collected, and said, "Officer, I believe you'll find I'm actually fully compliant, and these gentlemen are trespassing." The officer raised an eyebrow, looking from me to them, already sensing the tension. "Trespassing?" he asked, voice calm but authoritative. "Can you explain?" I stepped outside fully this time, hands visible, letting the sunlight hit me. "Sure, this is my property," I said, motioning to the yard, "and I've given them repeated warnings to leave. They ignored me. They've been intimidating me. I have documentation, photographs, and recordings if needed." The three HOA guys exchanged nervous glances. I could see their confidence starting to falter, just as I'd hoped. "Oh, really?" the tallest one muttered under his breath. "We." The officer cut him off with a look that could freeze lava. "Sir," he said calmly, "step back. I need a clear picture of what's happening." I took a deep breath, heart still racing. My neighbors were leaning out of their windows now, whispering, pointing, phones ready. I felt a strange satisfaction watching this unfold. The arrogance of these men was crumbling in real time. One of them tried to intervene. "Officer, we're just—" "Sir," the officer interrupted, tone sharper now, "you're on private property. I need your identification and a statement." The tallest guy's smirk faltered. His eyes flicked toward the other two. They were suddenly very aware that this wasn't going in their favor. I could see them mentally calculating how fast they could leave without looking guilty. I stepped forward confidently. "Officer, I have all the evidence you might need. They've been threatening me since they arrived, ignoring legal boundaries and attempting to intimidate me into compliance. All I've done is stand my ground." The officer's eyes narrowed slightly, scanning the yard, the men, and then back at me. "And you haven't used any physical force?" he asked. "Not a single inch," I replied. "Because that's not what this is about. It's about someone trying to assert authority they don't have, and I intend to make sure they know the law applies to everyone, even HOA thugs." I could see the wheels turning in the officer's mind. He glanced at the tallest man again. "Sir, are you aware you're on private property and not authorized to be here?" The tallest man swallowed hard, his confidence evaporating in seconds. "We." The officer shook his head slightly. "I suggest you leave immediately before this escalates further. Understood." And just like that, the mood shifted completely. These men, who had strutted onto my property like kings, were now small, flustered, and uncertain. Their plan of intimidation had failed spectacularly. I couldn't help a small smirk as they gathered their clipboards and shuffled toward the curb. My neighbors started clapping quietly from their windows, some whispering congratulations. The officer turned to me, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You handled that very well," he said. "A lot of people would have panicked. You stayed calm, documented everything, and let me see the facts. Good call." I exhaled, feeling my heart finally start to slow, but deep down I knew this wasn't over. The HOA had sent their muscle for a reason. This was just the opening act. The real chaos, the kind that would test my patience, my nerves, and my wits, was still coming. I glanced at the street as the HOA thugs retreated, muttering to themselves. The tallest one threw a glare over his shoulder, clearly plotting their next move. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, they weren't finished. Not by a long shot. I turned back to the officer and whispered, almost to myself, "This is far from over, and when they come back, I'll be ready." And with that, the tension on the street eased slightly, but the air still crackled with the promise of chaos yet to come. The street was quiet now, but the tension in my chest refused to fade. I knew the HOA wouldn't just give up. They had a reputation for overstepping boundaries, for pushing people until they snapped. And me, I wasn't about to give them that satisfaction. After the cops left, I retreated inside and grabbed the stack of paperwork I'd been keeping for exactly this kind of situation. Property deeds, HOA agreements, community rules, and a log of every email and letter I'd received over the past year. I spread them across my kitchen table, my hands shaking slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation. This wasn't just about proving a point anymore. This was about survival, about showing these so-called enforcers that the law wasn't optional, that no matter how many intimidation tactics they tried, I wasn't a person to be bullied. I started reviewing the documents carefully, each line of the HOA bylaws and rules. And then I found it, a clause buried deep, one that I had glanced over before but now seemed like a lifeline. It clearly stated that any enforcement action had to be formally documented and approved, with proper notice sent to the homeowner. I couldn't help but smile. This was the loophole I had been waiting for. They hadn't sent a notice. They hadn't followed procedure. Every step they'd taken so far, illegal. I could hear them outside, packing, muttering among themselves. I watched through the blinds as they gestured wildly, clearly frustrated that the intimidation tactic hadn't worked. And that's when I realized they didn't know what they were about to get into. I quickly typed up a summary of my findings, adding the specific bylaw references, dates, and times of every interaction. This wasn't just paperwork, it was armor. Every word, every clause was a nail in their credibility. Then, with a steady hand, I called my lawyer. I didn't even have to explain much. I just said, "They've sent enforcers to my property without notice. I have all documentation. Can we prepare a response?" Within an hour, I had legal confirmation. The HOA had overstepped. Their actions were technically illegal, and I had full grounds to counteract any claims they might try to make. But it wasn't just about legality. It was about sending a message, a warning. I needed them to understand that when you push someone who knows their rights, the game flips. I grabbed my phone and sent a photo of the bylaw clause to a few neighbors who had witnessed the confrontation. I added a simple caption, "Heads up, they don't get to do whatever they want. Read the rules." The reactions were instant, a flood of messages. "Wow, they really went too far. Good for you for standing your ground." Finally, someone calling them out. I felt a surge of vindication, but I knew better than to celebrate yet. The HOA wasn't going to roll over quietly. This was only the beginning of their response, and their next move, probably something even more audacious. By the afternoon, I could see the HOA president herself driving slowly down the street, window down, watching, probably trying to assess the damage and figure out how to salvage the situation. I didn't even bother acknowledging her. I had bigger things to focus on. I went back to my paperwork, rereading the clause for reassurance. Every word felt like a shield, every paragraph a sword. I felt prepared. I felt powerful. And most importantly, I felt like they were finally the ones on the defensive. Then I noticed something odd. The three enforcers were packing closer to my property again, whispering urgently, glancing at my house, clearly plotting. Their arrogance had been bruised, but their determination hadn't faltered. I smiled faintly. Let them come. Let them try. I had the law, I had witnesses, I had documentation, and I had nerves of steel. Every move they made from here on out would be under my watchful eye, and every misstep would be their undoing. I knew one thing for certain. This battle wasn't over. In fact, it was escalating. The HOA had underestimated me, underestimated my preparation, and underestimated my resolve. And that mistake, that was about to cost them dearly. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the street, I leaned against the window and whispered to myself, "You've played with fire, and now you're about to get burned." And with that, the tension in the neighborhood became palpable. Neighbors peered from behind curtains, phones ready, sensing that something monumental was about to unfold. And I was ready to turn every one of their moves against them. The stage was set, the players were in position, and the next act, well, it was going to be explosive. By the next morning, the street had a strange, tense energy. My neighbors whispered in hushed tones as they peeked through blinds, coffee cups in hand, clearly waiting for the next act in this ridiculous HOA drama. And I was calm, focused, and ready. I stepped outside to check my mailbox, casually scanning the street. That's when I saw them, the three men who had once tried to intimidate me. They were lingering near my property line, packing, talking in low voices, but it wasn't the confident swagger of yesterday. No, something had shifted. Their movements were jittery, hesitant, almost panicked. I didn't even have to speak. Their expressions told the story. They had realized that the carefully built illusion of power they carried onto my property was crumbling, and the more they realized it, the smaller they looked. I leaned casually against the porch railing, letting them stew in their own confusion. "Morning, gentlemen," I called out lightly. "Sleep well, or did the weight of knowing you're trespassing keep you up?" Their heads snapped toward me, the tallest one's jaw tightened. We just wanted to clarify." "Clarify what?" I interrupted, raising an eyebrow. "Your blatant trespass or your complete disregard for procedure, because I can provide you with copies of every bylaw you've violated." They exchanged nervous glances. I could almost see the panic spreading through their thoughts. Maybe they were starting to realize that the next few moves could ruin them professionally, or at least embarrass them enough that their own HOA would start asking questions. One of the men fumbled with his clipboard, muttering, This isn't supposed to happen." "No," I said, voice calm but edged with steel. "It's not supposed to happen. You underestimated me. You underestimated the law, and now you're going to deal with the consequences." The tallest guy stepped forward, attempting to regain control. "We can resolve this peacefully. There's no need for escalation." I let out a slow, incredulous laugh. "Peacefully? You came to my property, threatened me, and ignored legal procedure. Peaceful isn't in the vocabulary for what you just did." I noticed their hands fidgeting, their eyes darting toward the street as neighbors peeked curiously. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel the scales of power tipping. For the first time, these so-called enforcers were vulnerable. They were no longer the predators, they were the prey. Then, without warning, the balding guy spoke up, voice shaking slightly. We didn't realize." "Realize what?" I pressed, stepping a little closer, keeping my gaze steady. "That I know my rights, that I have proof of your trespass, that you've made a massive mistake coming here." They exchanged panicked looks, and I knew I had them exactly where I wanted. The arrogance that had fueled them yesterday was now crumbling into confusion and fear. The tallest one's voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "Maybe we should just leave." I smiled faintly, letting my calm dominance settle over the moment. "That's the first smart thing anyone said today." They shuffled backward toward the curb, mumbling excuses, clearly trying to save face, while I stood firm, fully aware of the power shift. Every move they had made had been documented, every threat recorded, every procedure ignored, and I had it all ready for legal review. I couldn't help but think about the absurdity of it all. Three men, paid to intimidate, now realizing the person they were trying to scare had complete control. The sheer irony made me smirk. My neighbors, emboldened by the sight, peeked further, whispering excitedly to each other. I could feel their eyes on me, silently cheering, silently wondering what would happen next. And I knew this was only the beginning. Because once someone underestimates you, once they show their weakness, you don't just wait for them to make another move. You prepare, you anticipate, and you strike with precision. I straightened, watching as the tallest man muttered something to the others and finally walked away, dragging their bruised pride behind them. My street had returned to a semblance of normalcy, but the tension lingered like smoke in the air. And I knew it wouldn't be long before the HOA president got involved. She'd see their retreat as a personal failure. She'd see it as a challenge. And when she did, that's when the real chaos would hit. I smiled, almost to myself, savoring the moment. The thugs had realized they were in trouble, but the best part, they didn't even know what was coming next. Because I wasn't done, far from it. I whispered under my breath, letting the words settle like a promise in the air. "You played your hand and you lost. The next time you come back, you'll regret underestimating me. Badly. And with that, the stage was set for a confrontation far bigger than anyone on the street could imagine. The HOA thought they were the hunters. They were about to find out who the real predator was. I had a feeling it was coming. The day the HOA president decided to intervene personally. She had been quiet so far, letting her muscle handle me, but the moment she realized they had failed, that's when the storm hits. It was mid-morning when I saw her car creeping down the street, windows down, sunglasses firmly in place. Her face was the kind of self-important expression that screams, "I'm in charge and don't you forget it." I straightened on my porch, sipping my coffee calmly. Let her see me. Let her realize she wasn't going to intimidate me. She stepped out, clipboard in hand, her heels clicking with the rhythm of someone who expected the world to bend to her whims. She surveyed the yard and her enforcers, who were now hovering like deer caught in headlights. I could see the frustration in their posture, the way they avoided eye contact with her. Clearly, the message had reached her. This situation wasn't under control. "Good morning," she said, her voice syrupy sweet, but with a sharp edge I could taste even from the porch. "I hear there's been some misunderstandings." "Morning," I replied, voice even. "Yes, misunderstandings. You see, your representatives trespassed on my property yesterday. They were intimidating me. I have documentation, witnesses, and legal proof that everything they did was in violation of both your own rules and the law." Her eyes narrowed. "I don't think you understand how an HOA works." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said, stepping closer, letting the morning sun highlight my confidence. "I understand the bylaws, the enforcement procedures, and the exact limitations of your authority, which is why I have every piece of evidence to show your actions were illegal." She paused, blinked, and then for the first time I saw a flicker of doubt. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. She wasn't used to being questioned. She wasn't used to being wrong, and this time she was both. I pulled out a folder from my porch table, tidy, organized, every page ready. "Here," I said, handing it toward her. "Notice, bylaws, documentation of your so-called enforcers violating property laws. Every email, every threat, every attempt at intimidation. You might want to sit down for this. It's a lot to take in." Her face paled slightly. She took the folder cautiously, almost as if it were a bomb. She flipped through the pages, and I could see the recognition in her eyes. Her expression shifted from arrogance to shock to panic. This can't be right," she muttered, almost to herself. "Oh, it's right," I replied calmly. "Every single word, every single action is right here. Your organization is exposed. And the best part, this isn't just me, you've been doing this to other homeowners too. I've already spoken to a few neighbors who are more than willing to corroborate everything you've done." I watched as her smug confidence crumbled. Her enforcers shifted uncomfortably, realizing for the first time that the power they thought they had was an illusion. And I felt a surge of vindication and satisfaction I could barely contain. She tried to speak to regain control, but the words faltered. Her voice was strained, tight, powerless. I think we need to resolve this." "No," I said firmly, shaking my head. "You need to understand that this ends on my terms. You overstepped, you underestimated me, and now you're going to face the consequences of your actions. Legally, publicly, in every way possible." Her face twisted in frustration, but there was nothing she could do. The twist, the unexpected turn, had completely flipped the situation. The hunter had become the hunted. The predator had walked straight into the home of someone who knew their rights better than they did. I glanced at the street. Neighbors peeked through blinds, cameras out, whispering excitedly. I could feel their anticipation, the thrill of seeing authority crumble when it had no right to be there. And then the final blow, a call from my lawyer. "You're sitting on a gold mine," they said. "The HOA's violations are massive. This will not end quietly for them. You've got leverage they can't ignore." I smiled, letting the words sink in. The chaos wasn't just starting, it had already begun, and it was fully in my control. The enforcers, the president, the petty intimidation tactics, all exposed, all on display. I looked at the HOA president one last time. Her eyes were wide, her composure shattered, her authority evaporating before my very eyes. I whispered under my breath, not for her, but for myself. You thought you could scare me, you thought you were untouchable, and now, you're nothing but a cautionary tale. The stage was set. The twist had changed everything. The HOA thought they had power, but the real power was mine, and the chaos they had hoped to unleash was now their own undoing. The morning air felt almost peaceful, but I knew better. Peace in this neighborhood was always temporary, especially when an HOA had been humiliated. I sipped my coffee slowly, watching the street, and waited. The president had vanished after yesterday's confrontation, probably retreating to hatch some plan. But whatever she had in mind, I was ready. By mid-afternoon, my phone buzzed, an email from the HOA. I opened it cautiously, expecting threats, demands, maybe another bluff. Instead, I was greeted with the most surreal thing, an apology. Yes, an apology. Not a half-hearted oops, not a vague note claiming they had misunderstood. A full-blown, formal, written apology acknowledging their trespass, their intimidation, and their failure to follow legal procedures. It was almost poetic, like watching a bully finally admit defeat in front of the entire schoolyard. I laughed softly, leaning back in my chair. My neighbors, peeking from windows and porches, nodded knowingly, smirking at my victory. Some even whispered congratulations. I framed the moment in my mind. The arrogance, the intimidation, the audacity, all evaporated in a few words on a screen. But the best part wasn't the apology, it was what came next. Within a few days, the HOA enforcers disappeared. No more black polos, no more intimidating stares, no more threats. The president's calls went unanswered. The supposed compliance team quietly resigned, or was reassigned, I don't know, and frankly, I didn't care. The street returned to its usual calm, but there was an unmistakable new respect in the air. People whispered about what had happened, nodding at me when I walked by. I felt it too, the satisfaction of knowing that I had faced down the so-called authority and emerged unscathed. And of course, there was a touch of humor in all of this. I framed the apology letter and hung it right next to my front door like a trophy. Every time someone walked by, I could see their eyes widen just slightly, as if to say, "Wow, she really did that." The neighbors loved it. Some started joking that I should give seminars on how to deal with rogue HOA thugs. Others just smiled, shaking their heads, clearly enjoying the downfall of people who had thought themselves untouchable. But the lesson wasn't just for the HOA. It was for everyone watching this unfold. Don't underestimate someone who knows their rights. Don't assume intimidation works if the person on the other side is prepared, calm, and clever. And most importantly, never, ever mistake confidence for weakness. I walked around my property that evening, feeling the cool grass under my feet, the golden sunlight painting my yard in soft hues. Everything was calm, almost surreal. And yet I knew the story would live on in whispers, in conversations, in memories of the street. Then I noticed something else. The air of tension that had hovered for weeks was gone. I felt lighter, freer, and somehow victorious in a way that didn't come from confrontation, but from standing firm, standing smart, and refusing to let anyone bully me. I glanced at my framed apology again, smiling. "You thought you could scare me," I whispered. "You thought you were untouchable, and now you're just a lesson in overconfidence." The final touch, a small gesture that made me chuckle. I printed a tiny sign, placed it discreetly near the front gate. "Private property, trespassers beware and learn the rules first." A subtle warning for any future troublemakers, a wink at the universe that I wasn't someone to mess with. By nightfall, the street was quiet. No black polos, no tense standoffs, no whispered threats. Just calm. And somewhere in the distance, I could hear neighbors laughing, sharing stories of how the notorious HOA had been taken down. It wasn't just my victory, it was a collective relief. As I closed the door for the night, I reflected on the entire ordeal. The fear, the intimidation, the suspense, all of it had led to this moment. Justice delivered with no one hurt, confidence restored, and authority properly respected. And as I lay in bed that night, I knew the truth. I had warned them to back off. They didn't listen. And that decision, it exploded into chaos that they would never forget. Sometimes victories aren't loud. Sometimes they're quiet, confident, and clever. And sometimes They come with a little humor, a little satisfaction, and a reminder that standing up for yourself is always worth it. I smiled as I drifted off to sleep. The HOA was finished, and my street finally mine again. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.